This is exercise 23 dealing with the special senses, specifically with vision. Remember, special senses, there are 5 of them: vision, hearing, equilibrium, taste, and smell. So this is going to deal with vision. I'm going to be looking at the anatomy of the eye. The eye is roughly 2.5 centimeters in diameter, which is about an inch. Most of the eye is enclosed and it's protected in the orbit, so the part that you are seeing on the very front of it is only a small portion of it. There are accessory structures associated with the eye. These include things like the eyebrows, the eyelids, the conjunctiva, which is going to help prevent the eye from drying out, the lacrimal apparatus, which is going to help moisten and lubricate, protect the eye, and then the extrinsic eye muscles, which are controlling the movements of the eye, such as moving the eyeball itself from left to right, top to bottom. The lacrimal apparatus, this is the apparatus is composed of the lacrimal gland, the lacrimal sac, lacrimal canal, lacrimal punctum, and the nasolacrimal duct. All together, this is dealing with the production of your tears and the draining of the tears. The tears are actually produced in the lacrimal gland, which is not in the inner corner of your eye, where you typically see the tears. They're actually formed in the lacrimal gland, which is on the outer portion of the eye, below the upper eyelid. Every time you blink, the tears flush over the surface of the eye. It's helping to lubricate it, helps to keep it moistened. It also helps to protect it because within the tears is a chemical called lysozyme, which has antimicrobial components to it. It actually will kill microorganisms. And for you, that's a good thing, bad for the microorganism, but for you, that's good to help protect the eye and protect you eventually. It prevents microorganisms from penetrating the body through the pupil, going through the eye to the interior portion of the eye and the optic nerve. It can enter into the brain. You don't want that to happen. So the tears have this, what we call microbial, or specifically a bactericidal component, meaning it will kill bacteria as the tears flush over the surface of the eyeball. Now it will drain through the lacrimal punctum and down to the lacrimal canal and can be stored in the lacrimal sac, accumulates there, and then eventually drains down the nasal lacrimal duct and drains into the nasal cavity. So why does it look like your tears are appearing at that lacrimal punctum, which is referred to commonly as your tear duct? Because when you're producing more tears or at a faster rate than it can drain, then it's going to accumulate there. Also, if you receive a blow to the nose or the side of the nose, basically on that lacrimal sac, it's going to compress it, and some of the tears are going to flow down the nasal lacrimal duct into the nasal cavity, and you're going to end up with a runny nose. And some of it will flow back out the lacrimal canal back to the eye, and so it's going to have the formation of tears. Also, now you know why you tend to get a runny nose whenever you're crying, because you're producing the tears faster than can be drained, so it looks like you're crying, and what is going down through the lacrimal canal, through the duct, into the nasal cavity gives you the runny nose. These extrinsic eye muscles, there are actually 8 of these muscles. They tend to be paired, will help move the eye in multiple directions, up, down, left, right, etc. Um, Someone who suffers from lazy eye, where the eye is not focusing straight out, usually it's because one of the muscles is weakened and the muscle opposing it on the other side is stronger and pulls than the eye in a particular direction. This can be corrected by surgery. Your photoreceptors, these are your rods and your cones. The rods allow you to see in dim light. They allow you to see black and white and various shades of gray. Very good for peripheral vision. The cones allow you to see in bright light. They allow you to see in color, and they typically have very high resolution to them. Both of these are modified neurons. Uh, the cones need to have that brighter light for activation. So in dim light, that's why you usually don't see in color. You just see black, white, and grays. There are three different types of pigment, or three different types of cones: blue, green, and red. This allows you to see, as I said, in color. Someone who is colorblind, that is a genetic disorder, and it may just be affecting one of these types of pigment. It just depends on the individual circumstance. As you can see here, the photoreceptors, those rods and cones, are embedded, or they comprise part of the retina, and then they will stimulate what's known as bipolar cells, which then stimulate the ganglion cells, and the axons from the ganglion cells all congregate together and form the optic nerve and leave the eye in that manner. There are two chambers of the eye, and they're filled with fluid. The division between these two chambers is the lens and the ciliary zonule, which helps to hold the lens in place. The posterior chamber is filled with vitreous humor, which is a gel-like consistency to it that is formed during embryonic development, and it is not replaced. So what you have is what you've got. If pressure tends to build up in that vitreous humor, that can lead to glaucoma. The anterior chamber is filled with aqueous humor. That's as the name implies, by aqueous, it is a water-based substance that is constantly being formed and drained. In this diagram, the arrows are pointing out how the aqueous humor is being formed near the ciliary process, and it's draining up towards the lens, out the pupil, then into the anterior chamber, basically in front of the iris, and then finally it's drained out of the ciliary veinous sinus. So the structure of the eye, there's three different layers. You have the fibrous, the vascular, and the inner, or the retina layers. You have the two humors we've already talked about, the aqueous humor and the vitreous humor, and then you have the lens. So in this diagram, it's a nice diagram showing everything together. Starting on the left side, you have the cornea, which is the clear portion that you see. It looks white to you, but it's actually clear. And then you have that anterior segment, the front chamber. You have the iris, which is, we're going to talk about all these components in a moment. That's what's giving the color of the eye, whether it's blue or brown, green, hazel, whatever color, that's going to be determined genetically. The pupil is the hole in the middle of the iris that allows light into the eye. And then, as you can see, the light would pass through the lens, which is held in place by the ciliary bodies and those suspensory ligaments. That is the division between the anterior and the posterior segment. The posterior segment is filled with the vitreous humor, as we just said, is that gel-like substance. And in this diagram, you can see with the different layers, the three different layers are peeled back. The outermost layer is the sclera layer. Then you have the choroid layer, and then the retina. The retina is where the photoreceptors, those rods and cones, are embedded. The ganglion axons, those ganglion cells, they're axons, they're neurons. All their axons are going to congregate at the back of the eye, forming the optic nerve, and they will leave the eye at that point and go to the respective spots, which we'll talk about in a second. The optic disc, also referred to as the blind spot, this is the area where, as you can see, you've got arteries and veins that are entering and leaving with the optic nerve. And so right where they're located as they enter and leave, in that optic disc area, there are no photoreceptors. And that's also the formation of the optic nerve. It's just the axons that are leaving there. So there's no photoreceptors to pick up the the light stimulus. So that outermost layer, the fibrous layer, is the sclera. That is along the back part of the eye. It is kind of white, known as the white of the eye. The cornea is a very small portion up front that is transparent that allows the light to enter the eye. The cornea has nerve endings, so if you scratch your eye, you have the danger of scratching the cornea. You're going to feel it, but there is no blood supply. For that reason, you can have a cornea transplant and not have to deal with rejection issues because there's no blood supply to it. The vascular layer is that middle layer. It has pigment. It helps to reflect light. Has 3 different regions. The majority of it is the choroid region, and then in the front is the ciliary body and the iris. The choroid is that is in the back. It has a very rich blood supply, helps to absorb that light, and it has the opening for that optic nerve, I believe. The ciliary body encircles the lens, so it's helping to control the shape of the lens and hold it in place. The lens is going to be changing shape, as we'll see in a moment. The iris is the colored part of the eye. As I said a bit ago, it is the colors determined genetically. It's located between the cornea and the lens. The pupil, which is the opening in the middle, is actually an opening to allow light to enter into the eye. It is a smooth muscle, so when it responds, when it constricts or dilates, that is going to be controlled involuntarily. Typically, it will constrict, the muscles will constrict, decreasing the size of the pupil, so less light's getting in when you're looking at something very close or there's very bright light. It will dilate or increase the size of the pupil, which increases the amount to allow in when light is very dim or you're looking at something in the distance. The retina is the innermost of those 3 layers. This is, we said earlier, does contain the photoreceptors. It contains those rods and cones. It contains additional neurons and glial or supporting cells. There's actually 2 layers of it. There's the outer one is the pigmented layer, and then the neural layer is the innermost one. The pigmented layer helps to absorb light. It prevents it from scattering all over the place. It also contains phagocytes. So if something is able to enter the eye, something forward, the phagocytes hopefully will be able to engulf it, carry out phagocytosis, and destroy it before it is allowed to penetrate deeper into the brain. It also is going to store vitamin A. We're not going to get into the details in the lab portion, but just so you know, vitamin A is necessary for the proper stimulus of the photoreceptors and how it sends that impulse to the brain. So your mom was right when she said to eat those carrots that contain vitamin A, because it does help your vision. The neural layer has the photoreceptors, rods and cones. It also has additional cells called bipolar cells and the ganglion cells. What's going to happen is when the light enters into the eye, it's going to activate the rods or the cones. These in turn will stimulate the bipolar cells, which then stimulate the ganglion cells. And then the axons of the ganglion cells are longer than the others, and they all will migrate and they congregate, and then they will leave the eye, this whole mass of them, as the optic nerve. So the order that it happens is the stimulus is going to stimulate those photoreceptors, which are the rods and cones. Second, those stimulate bipolar cells, which then third will stimulate the ganglion cells. The lens is biconvex. It's transparent. Light has to be able to pass through it. It's avascular, meaning it has no blood supply. It's very flexible. The idea is it has to change its shape. Why? Because depending on what you're looking at, whether it's something close up or far in the distance, it has to focus that, whatever that image is, on the retina. If it focuses it too short in front of the retina, or if it focuses it too far behind the retina, you are not going to see it clearly then. So it has to be able to be flexible enough to focus that image on the retina. Oftentimes, as we age, the flexibility decreases in there, and also sometimes it becomes cloudy and less transparent. That is what cataracts are. And so the lens, as you're well aware, can, through cataract surgery, can be easily replaced. Excuse me. This diagram is showing how the eyes have to work together. The right eye and the left eye have a field of view. So in this diagram, the right eye, the field of view would be blue and green, and then the left eye is seeing the field of view of yellow and green. So there is an area of overlap. Also, just so you are aware, typically the eyes are a little bit offset in terms of where they are focusing, and so that gives you depth perception. And if you notice by the lines, the back of the eyes showing how the optic nerve leaves, half of the nerves cross over from one side of the brain to the other for both eyes. So there is sharing. The image actually that is projected on the back of the retina is upside down, and then your brain knows to flip it right side up in the visual cortex area of the brain where you're going to process this information. It's going to process that information from both eyes. It knows to piece or superimpose them together. That allows you to see depth perception, and it knows to flip it right side up. This is a diagram showing some pictures, or actually not a diagram, it's pictures showing a sheep eye dissection. As you can see in the lower picture, you can easily see that vitreous humor, that it looks kind of like jello. And then the lens is also labeled in there. And then in the upper right corner, one thing I mentioned, the tapetum lucidum, this is not found in humans. This is present in animals that have very good night vision. What it does is it reflects the light back to the retina. So any light that passed through the retina, through the choroid, it's going to reflect back to the retina. It gives you an extra chance of being able to stimulate all the photoreceptors so you can see better. When you do an eye dissection, sheep, cows, cats, etc., have a lot of other animals have this. Like I say, humans do not. Um, but it's really kind of a, in sheep, it's a kind of a pearl blue. It's a very pretty color that helps to reflect it back.